everybody, it's Rose and I'm here with my next project. Today is Sunday, March 15th. It is just about 8 o'clock at night and I am going to start drilling number 250, the Cheshire Cat. That came up in the penny pick when I finished the eagle with flag. And so I'm going to start working on it tonight. I won't finish it tonight because I'm not going to work all night. And tomorrow I'm going to go back to working on my family photo, which is underneath all of this stuff here. But for now I'm going to work on this because from now on I'm going to work on small projects during the weekends and large projects during the week. And I might work on small projects if I get fed up with something during the week. What the heck? I'm just gonna go with it. And yeah, so this is a special shaped mandala. It's not really a mandala, but I call it a mandala because it's 100% symmetrical, like from left to right. And it has a lot of special shapes. So I think I've posted well, as of when I start this, I haven't yet posted the video for it, but I will be posting the video for it very soon. And the unboxing video, I mean. And so I'm just going to start drilling. And I'm going to start, I don't know if I want to start at number 1 or start at number 10. I think I'll get more satisfaction if I start at number 10 and work backwards to number 1, which are these exquisite crystal special shapes. Okay, so I'm going to talk over the drilling, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to be talking about at the moment that I'm recording this. So it will very likely be a drill and read. I just don't know which one. Okay, so here we go. Get ready. Well, hello, my friends. This is Rose, and I am back with Chapter 9 of the Magnate's Manifesto by Jennifer Hayward. For those of you who have not been with me through chapters 1 to 8, you can click the little I up in the top right-hand corner, and that'll take you to the playlist for the earlier chapters of this book. That playlist will include all of the chapters that I've uploaded so far. So if you're coming to this after I post it, and after I've finished more chapters, you can actually go to that playlist and listen to future chapters. So with no further ado, I'm going to start. Let's get ready to find out what happens next. Chapter 9. The peal of his cell phone in the adjoining room woke Jared at 6 the next morning. Blinking against the light filtering through the windows, he slid out of bed, grabbed his boxers from the floor, and hightailed it into his room in the hopes of catching it before it woke Bailey. A glance at the call display told him it was Danny, his private investigator. Kicking the connecting door closed, he took the call. Stone. You sound half asleep. Thought you'd be halfway down the Champs-Élysées by now, running your little heart out. Eventful night last night. Jared crossed to the French doors and squinted out at the empty Paris streets. You have something for me, or did you call just to pay me back? It's your father. I had my contact do the usual check-in this week. He said he wants to talk to you. His father wanted to talk to him? He pressed a palm against the elegantly carved mahogany casing of the door. It had been, what, a year and a half, 2 years, since he'd talked to Graham Stone in a short, curt conversation to sort out some legalities.
What does he want? Is he okay? He wouldn't say. Says you need to come to him. Why should he go running when his father had shut him out for almost a decade? Danny read the pause. He doesn't look great, Jared. Pretty haggard from what my guy says. His chest tightened. This was not what he needed right now. I can't go for a couple of weeks. I'm just relaying the message. Oh, and Jared, his PI's voice deepened to a satisfied purr. That dirt you wanted on Michael Craig's proclivity to abuse his expense accounts? I have it. It's bigger and better than you could have imagined. A twist of satisfaction curled through him. Send it through. All of it. He ended the call and tossed his cell phone on the desk. Michael Craig deserved what he had coming to him. What caused an ache to sit low in his chest, ever present but more pronounced now, was how much he loved his father. Graham Stone had never been too busy, even with his insane hours as a banker, to spend time with his son. Whether it had been building a car or throwing a football around, he'd always been there, even if it wasn't as much as Jared would have liked. Then slowly, in the later years, his father had begun to sink. The massive amounts of stress had finally gotten to him, sending him to a place his youthful son couldn't understand or help him out of. A fist squeezed his chest, growing larger with every breath. When his father had made his biggest mistake, had stolen that money, it had been too late, far too late, to do anything to save his soul. There likely would never be a day on this earth when Jared wouldn't wonder what else he could have done to prevent it. He'd just learned to live with the guilt. Or had he? The slow burn consuming him didn't make him think so. He'd always thought that walking away, distancing himself from the shame that had enveloped his family, was the right thing to do for his own survival. For his business, where his reputation was everything. His father hadn't wanted his help, so what choice had he had? Light slanted across his face as the sun rose higher in the sky. He had a decision to make. Did he stop running and see what the man who had once been his hero wanted? Or did he wait until it was too late? Rather than contemplate a question he wasn't prepared to answer, he headed for the shower. It was too late to go back to bed, and really, it was the last place he should be. Why he'd thought he could take Bailey to bed in a no-strings arrangement as she'd offered was the joke of the century. He turned the shower on and stepped under a steaming hot spray. No strings. He might as well have handed Bailey the rope and asked her to tie him up in knots. Because if his Zen master had cornered him now and ordered self-awareness, he would have had to admit the only word for last night was emotional. He struggled to get his mouth around the word because it was so foreign to his vocabulary. Emotion didn't figure into his work or relationships. It was an unwise word that made people do stupid things. But he could not deny the truth. He had never felt so connected to another person in his life, and not just because Bailey had been a virgin. It had been as if he was in her head and she'd been in his. God! He tipped his head back and sluiced the water out of his face. He'd told himself not to do it, had warned himself it was a mistake. Why did he continue to let himself want what he couldn't have? How could he be tangling himself up in a woman who was not only the obsession of Alexander Gagnon, she was rapidly becoming his? He tipped shampoo over his head and attempted to scrub some sense back into his brain. He needed to focus on this presentation and win. Take Bailey at her word. It had been one night of ridiculously good sex, agreed upon by two consenting adults. The fact that Bailey had stolen a piece of his heart last night, had been stealing pieces of it for the last week, was inconsequential. He would never be the kind of man who connected on a permanent basis. He didn't have it in him. It was time he started acting like it. Bailey leaned back against the bathroom door, nail in her mouth in an absent-minded chew as she had contemplated an in-the-shower Jared from the perspective of a woman he'd just taken to heaven and back. She was sure no other man would equal his outrageously good body and technique, and had a newfound appreciation for the tennis bracelet club in the valley. She replaced the thoroughly chewed nail with another. Last night had been exactly what she'd needed to take her mind off Alexander Gagnon, except she wasn't sure it had just been sex. She could have stayed in Jared's arms forever, and that was the problem. Not that he'd sneaked out of her bed. She swallowed hard. Last night had been unforgettable. The heartbreakingly beautiful way Jared had taken her virginity, so in tune with her every emotion. How treasured he'd made her feel. How desired. Oh, Lord. She snaked a hand through her tangled hair. She told herself she wasn't getting emotional about this. Enough. She cleared her throat. Could you tell me where the research is? I want to read it before our meeting. The click of the shower shutting off should have been her first clue he was getting out. Why she stood there frozen as he shoved the curtain aside and reached for a towel, water dripping off his utterly delicious masculinity, she wasn't sure. Sorry, She took a step backwards. I'll wait for you in the bedroom. For God's sake, Bailey. He ran the towel over his hair. You had your legs wrapped around me last night. It's a little late to be embarrassed. Yes, well, she thought. That was last night, and this was now. She bit her lip. Was that your phone I heard earlier? He nodded, relieving her immensely by wrapping the towel around his hips. The hard set of his angular face didn't do a great job of reinforcing that comfort, though. His blue gaze was laser-focused and impersonal as he waved his hand toward the bedroom. It's on the table by the window. Help yourself. She shifted her weight to the other foot, studied him. Regret. Definitely regret. Fine. I ordered us coffee and croissants. I'll go read it. Thanks. She waited a fraction of a second, just to see if he'd have anything to say about last night. Anything that might make it a little less awkward today. The silence was deafening. She dug her toe into the tile and looked up at him. It's clear you regret what happened last night. He gave her an even look. I don't regret it. Then why do you look like... Bailey! His gaze narrowed. It was great. It was hot. You were hot. Absolutely worth it. What else can I say? She squinted at him. Had he actually just said that? A sharp pain gouged her insides. Right, she said, clenching her stomach and pushing past it. Good to know. And in case you're running a little scared, which is wholly possible, you're absolutely right. I meant what I said. It was one night. We're good. She turned on her heel and left before she became certified dangerous. They spent the morning hearing presentations from the marketing and sales groups at Maison headquarters in the Montparnasse section of Paris. Jared thought it interesting that Bailey sat on the other side of the room from him beside an attractive, very young French marketing executive who flirted with her at every possible opportunity. He told himself it was a smart, strategic move on her part, positioning herself as part of the Maison team. That was before, however, she walked away from him mid-sentence during a break, before she blew off his request to get her a coffee. Bailey, he kept his voice low as he cornered her on the way back from the machine, coffee in hand. You know this can't happen between us. It's a bad idea. She looked up at him, the only sign there was anything going on behind that ice-cold expression of hers, the quivering of her bottom lip. I told you this morning, I get it. Hang on to that impressive set of rules, Jared. It's all good. He stood there, speechless, as she ducked around him and set the coffee down. Really? She was going to be like that about it? The deep freeze continued throughout the afternoon as they toured 3 of Maison's stores in Paris, through the cocktails that preceded the French company's annual summer party they'd been invited to attend along with the Gehrig team. He held it together through it all until they were speaking to the CEO of a Parisian cosmetics company Maison had a partnership with, Jared laying on the charm because the CEO was a great contact to have. Then Bailey rolled her eyes at him, and muttered something about needing to use the ladies' room. He stared after her, a dangerous heat filling his head. What was wrong with her? They had the biggest deal of his life to win tomorrow. He had backed her without fail this entire time, and she was acting like a girl over one night together. He made it through the rest of his conversation with the CEO, scouted out the washrooms, and found them in a hallway off the restaurant. They were one-person affairs, and there were multiples of them. He eyed the one marked women with the closed door, stuck his hand against the wall, and waited. When the door swung open and Bailey stepped out, he pounced. "Give me a minute, will you?" He bit the words out as he shoved her back into the washroom and shut the door. "Jared," she looked up at him with wide eyes, "this is not the place. You're making it the place." He jammed his hands into his pockets and stared at her. "You told me last night there were no strings, so for God's sake, what is wrong with you?" "Nothing." She bit her lip and made a study of the intricate pattern of the floor tiles. His curse split the air. He slid his fingers under her chin and brought her gaze up to his. The brightness in her eyes made his stomach clench. "Don't you do this to me, Bailey. You promised me you'd be okay with this." "I am." She pulled out of his grasp and backed up against the vanity. "I guess I'm just not made of stone like you are." "Funny," she derided, forcing out a harsh bark of laughter. "Women like to use that to refer to a certain body part of yours, but I think it better describes your heart. You can just turn it off and on at will, can't you?" He looked at her, nonplussed. "Apparently not with you, because here I am, when I should be schmoozing executives." "Oh," she choked out, "I think you were doing an excellent job of that." "Jealous, Bailey?" She stared him down for a moment, then leaned back against the vanity and ran her hands through her hair. I'm just finding it hard to put last night aside, to pretend it wasn't special, when to me, it was." He felt his carefully engineered defenses dissolve into dust. Bailey was like a flaw in his perfectly designed ability not to care, a weakness that would surely dismantle him completely if he let it. "It was special to me, too," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "I just don't want us to get too carried away here." "Why?" She poked him in the chest, and God, didn't she know by now how much that antagonized him? "What do you think might happen if you let yourself feel? The earth might open up and swallow you whole?" "No, Bailey." "Then what? What do you think's going to happen?" He reached for her then, his hands purposeful, as he sank them into her waist and deposited her on the marble counter. "I might do this." He brought his mouth down on hers in a hot, hungry kiss that was equal parts punishment and absolution. She pushed her hands against his shoulders as if to reject him, but if he was jumping into the fire, then so was she. He cupped her jaw, gentled the kiss, and called himself a complete and absolute fool. A sigh racked her as she buried her fingers in his hair and kissed him back, heated and without reserve. When he finally lifted his head, it was to nudge her thighs apart, step between them, and draw her closer. "You are pulling me apart, piece by piece," he admitted huskily, "and I don't like it." "I don't either." She reached up and cradled his jaw in her palms. "But you hurt me this morning, Jared. Be honest with me, yes, but at least explain where it's coming from." "I'm sorry." He whispered the words against her mouth, against the velvety softness of her cheek, against the perfectly shaped earlobe he bit into, sending a shiver through her. It moved through him, made his heart race as his hands went to the hem of her dress and pushed it up, allowing his palms access to the smooth, voluptuous curve of her hip. The scent of her warm, heated flesh filled his head. He slid his hands under her bottom and dragged her to the edge of the vanity. He wouldn't take her here, he just needed to feel her against him. Jared. She moaned his name as if they should stop and start all at the same time. He pulled her hips into his and kissed her. Bailey whimpered and wound her legs around him, and if he'd been inside her, it couldn't have felt better than the sweet torture he was inflicting upon himself now. He lifted his mouth from hers and framed her face with his palms. As much as I want this, it's not happening here. She nodded. He lifted her off the counter and straightened her clothes, then his own. I need to fix my lipstick, she murmured, looking a bit shattered. You go. He nodded and pulled open the door, was halfway through it when he turned back, pulled her into his arms, and stole one last kiss. She wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back. He indulged it for a few seconds, then set her away from him. We'll talk when we get back to the hotel, okay? Okay. He released her and left. He did not see Alexander until he just about walked into him. Stopping short, his gaze flickered back to the door he'd just exited from. Oh, I caught the whole touching kiss. The Frenchman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Am I allowed to say I'm jealous? Because I am, Stone. Why don't we say we're overdue for a drink instead? Jared resisted the urge to deck him. He was shutting Alexander Gagnon down, and he was shutting him down now. Alexander lifted his shoulders. If you say so. Jared led the way to the bar by way of answer, ordered 2 scotches, and took a deep pull of his before he deigned to speak. Here's how this is going to go, Gagnon. You're going to stay away from Bailey. You're never going to say another sideways word to her, and if you do, I will take you out at the knees. Alexander smiled, a lazy, loose twist of the lips that wasn't at all concerned. You have it bad. You know that, Stone. He did. He was only beginning to realize how bad. Alexander eyed him over the top of his glass. She said you weren't sleeping together. Things change. Jared set his drink down, flattened his palms on the bar, and leaned forward until the far too smooth soon-to-be CEO filled his field of vision. You aren't ever having her. Get that through your head. Alexander took a sip of his scotch. No isn't a word I tend to take very seriously. It only makes me want something more. His mouth twisted. You couldn't even buy her. What makes you think you could ever have her? A warning light flickered in those slate gray eyes, but his shrug was elegantly dismissive. This deal will make or break you, Stone. Decide your future at a very rocky point in your company's history. Why not set Bailey free for a night? Donate her to the cause. You can put her in the shower afterward and pretend I never happened. He froze, clenched his hands by his sides. A fury like he'd never known blanketed him. You are a sick bastard, you know that? He gritted out. She told me you wanted what I have. Well, you will never have what I have, Gagnon. Ever. Alexander's face tightened. You are walking a thin, thin line, Stone. As are you, he bit out, shoving his drink on the bar and pushing to his feet. I should have taken her under your nose tonight. That would have given me a deep sense of satisfaction. He walked away before he lost his mind, then thought he might already have. Because he shouldn't have said that. He should not have gone there. Bailey re-entered the restaurant just as Jared got up from the bar, a coldly furious look on his face, and walked away from Alexander. The matching look the Maison air wore sent alarm bells ringing through her. What could possibly have happened in the last 10 minutes? Before she could snare Jared and find out, David was flagging him down to introduce him to someone. Then they were being rounded up for dinner with both Gagnons, the Garrig team, and several marketing executives from Maison. Jared sat beside her at the round table of 10, quietly seething, leaving Bailey to carry the conversation from their end. "So," she offered valiantly, "you must all love living in Paris. It's so gorgeous." David nodded. "Although I intend on retiring to the house in the Cap. To me, it's le paradis sur terre. Heaven on earth." "Agreed," Bailey nodded. "I love the climate. Perfectly temperate." "But you must like the extreme heat," Alexander interjected, "given that you lived in Las Vegas." The edge to his tone made Bailey set her wine glass down with a jerky movement. "I do," she agreed evenly, "but I much prefer the more moderate Northern California climate." "Speaking of Vegas," Alexander waved an elegant, long-fingered hand at her. "I remembered last night where I met you. I usually have such an impeccable memory. It was driving me crazy." Bailey froze. Jared's gaze flickered to Alexander, a warning glint in it. "Gagnon?" "It was the Red Room," Alexander continued. "How I could have forgotten when you were so memorable, I don't know." John Garrigg's mouth dropped open. The room began to spin. "Do you know the Red Room?" Alexander turned to one of his marketing executives. The perfectly put-together Frenchman shook his head. His boss sat back in his chair and folded his arms over his chest. "Oh, you must go next time you're there. They have the most drop-dead beautiful women on stage. My clients used to salivate. But there was one dancer," he commented, looking over at Bailey, a dark glitter in his silver eyes, "who called herself Kate Delaney, who held us all spellbound. We couldn't take our eyes off her." A buzzing sound filled Bailey's head. David gave his son a confused look. "What does this have to do with Bailey?" "Kate Delaney was Bailey's stage name." "Oh." David ran a hand over his jaw and looked at Bailey. "So you were one of those, what do you call them, burlesque dancers?" "No," Bailey corrected quietly, bile climbing her throat at an alarming rate. "The Red Room is a high-end strip club." David's eyes widened. "A strip club?" The couple of execs who'd had their heads buried in their smartphones the entire meal looked up, eyes fastening on her. Bailey swallowed hard, heat flooding every inch of her skin. "Yes, it was how I paid my way through school." A frown creased the elder Frenchman's brow. "That must have been lucrative," Bailey said. She dropped her gaze to the candle flickering in the center of the table and absorbed the total and complete silence. Wished she could disappear into the red-hot flame. John Garrig cleared his throat. "Well, I, for one, love the Red Room. The ladies are all just beautiful, and I'm sure," he said, shooting a red-faced look at Bailey, "you look just lovely." "There wasn't an unaffected man in the room," Alexander agreed. "Isn't it great to see the American dream alive and well? From stripper to CMO. How inspiring." The bile in her throat threatened to make an immediate appearance. She pressed a hand to her mouth and swallowed hard. Jared made a sound and pressed his palms into the table. Bailey covered his hand with hers. "Don't." He stared at her hand for a long, hard moment, then lowered himself back into his seat. David flicked his son a reprimanding look. "If you were a gentleman, you would pick another line of conversation, Alexander, but since your manners often escape you, I will." David started a discussion about foreign exchange rates. John Garrig hurriedly joined in. Bailey drew in a breath, then another. Told herself walking away from the table right now wasn't an option, but it was painful, physically uncomfortable to sit there with the young executives shooting speculative glances across the table at her. One of them was tapping away on his phone, then slid it discreetly towards his coworker. Photos of her as Kate Delaney, no doubt. She tried to get the club to sell the promotional photos to her, to take them off the website, and they'd agreed, but nothing ever really disappeared from the internet. It just pretended to. Jared laid his palm on her thigh. Breathe. She pushed his hand away and stared sightlessly out the window at the glittering Eiffel Tower. Felt everything go gray around her as she retreated. She knew the routine, knew this humiliation like a second skin. It was a familiar, hateful feeling she'd never wanted to feel again. She drained her wine glass, smiled tightly at the waiter as he appeared to refill it. Growing up in her house, it had been taboo to say the word alcoholic, even though her father had clearly been one, and his booze-induced rages had been a monthly fixture. As if none of them said it, it didn't exist. Apparently, she'd also decided to live her life in denial. If she didn't acknowledge the past and the choices she'd made, it could never hurt her. She could go on pretending she was something she wasn't. But that was all over now. With those men looking at her like this, she felt like a Jenga puzzle someone had pulled the last piece out of. "I need to go," she muttered in a low, harsh voice to Jared as their dessert plates were cleared. "Tell them I have a headache. Tell them I'm exhausted. Tell them whatever you want." She stood up, grabbed her wrap, and skirted her way through the tables to the exit. On the street, she flagged a cab. Jared caught up with her as she was about to slide in. "Get in," he said grimly, climbing in behind her when she did. Neither of them spoke until they were in Bailey's hotel suite. She tossed her bag on a chair and turned on him. "Why would he do it? Why would he humiliate me like that? What happened between the two of you?" Jared sat down on the sofa near the windows. The guilty schoolboy look he wore as he raked his hands through his hair made her heart sink into the ground. "Alexander saw me coming out of the washroom. He made some comments I couldn't let pass. I figured it was time we had a chat." She felt the color drain from her face. "We weren't going to do that. I changed my mind. I said some things I shouldn't have." "Like what?" His mouth flattened. "When I made it clear you were with me, he said he didn't care. He said I should take one for the deal. Give you to him for a night and then put you in the shower afterwards and forget it happened." He pressed his fingers to his temples. "I lost my mind. I went too far." A wave of nausea flashed over her. "What else did you say?" "I told him I wished I'd taken you right there under his nose so he would know what he could never have." Her breath left her. "You didn't." "I did." Her hands curled by her sides. "You—" He stood up. "Bailey!" "No!" She hurled the word at him. "You do not get to be excused for this, Jared. You do not get to be excused for egging him on in some testosterone-fueled duel when you knew what he was capable of. You knew he would not hesitate to throw my past in my face." His face grayed. "I wasn't thinking." No, you weren't. You were too busy bragging about being the one to get me into bed, make it impossible for him to not retaliate." She threw her hands up in the air. "My God, Jared, I'm falling for you, falling for you. How could you do this?" He covered the ground between them with swift steps. The fire in his eyes set her back on her heels. "I have put this deal, this must-win deal, on the line for you this entire time, Bailey, because of my feelings for you. So do not question my intentions. Yes, I made a mistake tonight. I let my temper get the best of me, and I'm sorry for that. But it's done. And maybe it's a good thing, because you need to move on. You need to stop letting the past hold you captive." Her eyes widened. "You're kidding, right? You think it's a good thing that the entire table of men I have to present to tomorrow will now be picturing me naked on a stage rather than listening to what I have to say? He lifted a brow. So what? Who cares what they think? You're brilliant. Your ideas are brilliant. You want to defy the naysayers? Prove my manifesto is crap? Then get tougher, Bailey. Get a whole lot tougher than that. The fists she had clenched by her sides tightened. She thought she might hit him then, and he eyed her as if he would take it. Instead, she felt big, huge, fat tears burning the backs of her eyes, and backed away from him before she gave in to them. You said earlier you wanted to talk. Let's talk then. This is proving very illuminating. He shook his head. I don't think now is the right time. His eyes said more than his words, the grim look stretching his face, making her chest go tight. He was second-guessing what he'd said earlier, second-guessing his feelings for her after what had happened tonight, after he'd watched an entire table of men react to what she'd been, just as he had the first time she'd told him. Shocked, appalled, she could see it on his face. Anger built inside her, a white-hot storm that was impossible to control. She clenched her hands by her sides. How is it that every man in her life eventually rejected her? Her father, who'd thrown her out. The man she'd liked in Vegas, who'd wanted only one thing. Now Jared. Shame washed over her, stained her skin like a brand. He had treated her like a power play with Alexander because that's what she was to him, expendable. Now that you have me, she lashed out, so hurt she couldn't see straight, why not enjoy the full benefits? She reached down and yanked her shoe off and threw it at him, a silver missile he plucked out of the air with cat-like reflexes. I know you're curious, she continued. You asked me about it in Nice, so why not sit back and let me demonstrate? His gaze tracked her as she bent her leg and reached for the other shoe. Bailey! Wham! The shoe smacked his outstretched palm and fell to the floor. He took a step forward and reached for her, but she backed away, flashing him a furious look. Sit! He sat, likely because he didn't know what else to do with a crazy woman on the loose. Bailey's fingers moved to the buttons of her shirt, stumbling as she undid them. That was hot, right? On the sink in the washroom? I'll make it hotter. He shook his head. Stop it. Oh, come on. You'll love it. She tore at the last button and yanked the shirt off. Get in the spirit, Jared. Bailey. His eyes flashed a warning. Put your shirt back on. Why? All you want is this. You made that clear this morning. She eased her skirt over her hips in a seductive, admittedly angry twist. All men ever want is this. He shook his head. I care about you. You know I do. She stalked towards him, sank her hands into his shoulders and straddled him. You wanted to know how I danced for them? How I touched them? She settled herself into his hard thighs. Like this. He kept his hands stiffly by his sides, anger darkening his face. It made her furious, made her push her breasts into his chest and rotate her hips against him in a much more intimate caress than she would ever have given a customer. A harsh breath left his lungs. You see, she derided, you can't deny you like it. Of course I like it. He clamped his hands around her hips and held her still. There isn't a second I don't want you, but you are worth more than this. She shook her head, tears burning the back of her eyes in a glittering prelude to total breakdown. I saw your face when I told you what I was. You were horrified. I was shocked. Shocked, horrified. What's the difference? He grimaced. A big one. She swallowed hard, dared herself to ask the question that might break her. Because how much worse could she feel about herself? Could you ever imagine yourself with me, Jared, with all my flaws? His jaw hardened. I've told you I care about you. Stop pushing me. The warning in his eyes scared her. The sudden, earth-shattering realization that she was undeniably, unmistakably in love with him was worse. She reached for old habits, old powers, as she pressed a kiss to the corner of his mouth, slid her palm across his thighs to where he lay stiff and thick beneath his trousers. He jerked against her hand, and the triumph rocketed through her like a drug she'd been denied too long. No! No! He dumped her on the sofa so fast it made her head spin, stepped back. The rebuke in his face made her heart shrivel. We have a presentation to do tomorrow. We are going in there as a team, Bailey, and we are winning. We are going to do what we came here to do. This, he said, glaring at her, is not happening. Her lips trembled. You don't want me. You're right, he said harshly. I want the Bailey I know, the woman who let me look into her soul last night. Not this. He turned on his heel and left, slamming the connecting door behind him. Bailey curled up in a ball on the sofa and cried. Cried for the girl she'd been, for what she'd wished she hadn't had to do. At Jared for being so cruel. At herself for ruining everything. And so ends Chapter 9. I hope you join me again real soon for Chapter 10. Bye-bye for now.